My home state of California is now in the 5th year of a devastating drought.
Unprecedented drought.
Pretty much a wasteland.
It's hard to live here and not worry about climate change. And it seems like things are getting worse every day.
6 active wildfires.
Nearly 83,000 people evacuated.
Sometimes I feel powerless in the face of this crisis. But I know there must be something we can do. I'm looking for a solution to climate change. It needs to be big, and it needs to be now. I'm an actress and an animal rights activist. But lately, I've turned my focus to climate change because it's the single biggest threat facing us all. Recently, I've been hearing about carbon pricing, a solution that all sorts of prominent people are talking about.
We need to put a clear price on carbon.
Carbon pricing is critical for reducing emissions.
Renewable energy, fossil fuels, and putting a price on carbon pollution are beginning to turn the tide.
I have long believed the most elegant way to reduce carbon emissions is to put a price on it.
Putting a price on carbon? What do they mean by that? I hear there's a guy in town who might be able to explain.
Thank you very much. My name is Yaron Bauman. I appear before you tonight as the world's first and only stand-up economist. I really only have one thing going for me as a stand-up economist, and that's low expectations. Actually, when I do serious economics work, I work on climate change and carbon taxes, the idea that we can use the tools of economics to protect the environment. Though I did this talk once for a very conservative crowd in Minnesota, and this fellow came up to me and said the stuff I said about climate change was the funniest part of my whole routine.
Climate change is really overwhelming. And I've heard about carbon pricing, I've heard it could be a solution, but I don't really know what it is.
Basically, it's the idea that the way to get less pollution is to make polluting expensive. And ultimately, it's a pretty simple idea. Let's pay more for bad things and let's pay less for good things. Let's change our tax system in a way that fossil fuel and fossil fuel intensive products are more expensive and that more sustainable products are less expensive so that everybody has an incentive to do the right thing.
I think people are afraid of the word tax. People just feel like they have to pay more money. What do we say to those people?
Changing the tax system doesn't just involve penalties. We're going to have higher taxes on carbon emissions, but they're going to be offset by lower taxes on income, on sales, on all the good things that we want to encourage in the economy.
You know, my mom's a smoker, and I remember the increase in tax, and I remember that actually changed a lot of lives. It influenced a lot of people in their decision-making.
Yeah, it's a similar idea with the sin tax, with a tax on cigarettes, a tax on alcohol, where you're trying to use the tax system to influence people's behaviors. You know, we're not talking about huge changes, we're talking about a relatively small tweak to the tax system, and it's going to have ripple effects that are going to change the world.
I didn't realize that right now, across most of the US, companies can put CO2 in the air for free. A carbon price is simply a tax on the pollution that's causing climate change. So why aren't we doing this? As I dig a little more, I'm finding out that we very nearly did. In 2008, cap and trade, a form of carbon pricing, had the support of both Democratic and Republican politicians.
The energy bill before the House will finally create a set of incentives that will spark a clean energy transformation of our economy.
Once you price carbon in a reasonable way, this green economy that we're hoping for really will begin to flourish.
But the fossil fuel industry is one of the most profitable in human history, and in 2009, they fought back hard, organizing anti-carbon pricing rallies and spending close to $200 million on campaigns.
They call it cap and trade, but it's really just a big new tax all of us will end up paying for.
And I'll take dead aim at the cap and trade bill.
Before most people really knew what a carbon price was, they were convinced it was a bad idea. Since then, some states have made progress, but Congress has failed to pass a national carbon price a staggering 27 times. I hate to think of the damage our inaction is causing, not just here, but around the world. As the consequences of climate change worsen from Africa to the US, people are demanding solutions. A movement calling for a price on carbon is spreading, and at the forefront of the fight, millennials.
1, 2, 3, right!
I've been working on this climate change campaign, uniting students across the country to really come together. The way we feel we can do that is through a price on carbon. We're demanding action. This is not the future we're going to have, and that's really why I want you guys to join on.
We all have to pay to take our trash to the curb, but the major polluters in industry can dump their pollution into our shared world for nothing. We subsidize the fossil fuel industry, and we pay for the cleaning up of disasters that are striking us more and more.
There's been a rhetoric for so long that it's the youth don't care. Well, it's time to change that, and it's time to show that we as Texas Tech Red Raiders, we're willing to be on the front line of this battle to solve climate change. And what I'm about to start running here on campus is a carbon pricing campaign.
I mean, there are people in my family who, you know, they wouldn't be where they were without, you know, the oil industry, and it's kind of hard to step up and say, we're going to take away these jobs.
There are people's livelihoods at stake in this conversation, but climate change is going to affect everyone, and we are the last generation that has a chance to fight it.
Texas Tech University is in the heart of oil country, and many of its students end up working in fossil fuel industries. Around these parts, you don't hear much about global warming. That's what makes Jordan Vogel's story so interesting. Last summer, Jordan had an eye-opening internship in Washington, D.C., where he learned what climate change is doing to his state. Now, he's dedicated to fighting for a solution, but it's proving to be a hard sell, even with his own family.
Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Bless us, O Lord, and these gifts which we're about to receive from thy bounty through Christ our Lord. The Holy Spirit, amen.
The severity and the variability of weather is changing, and it is increasing. We're going to have more severe droughts. We're going to have harsher floods.
That's right.
The big thing that we're trying to get started at Texas Tech is just to educate students on the topic of climate change and the solution that I've posed and others have posed, which is this carbon price. Because what's the easiest way to reduce consumption of a good? Increase the price of the good.
Tax it.
Yeah.
Who's going to pay for it?
These oil companies.
Yeah, Jordan, the problem, though, is that you say these oil companies, those oil companies build a product for us, namely gasoline.
Absolutely.
And so indirectly, we're having to pay for it. Ultimately, the higher their costs go, the more expensive gasoline comes for us.
Oh, no, absolutely. And we know that that's going to be the result that comes from the carbon fee. But our ultimate goal is that one day renewables will be the more cost-effective solution. I mean, if you could use clean energy right now and it was just as cost-effective as fossil fuels, would you use it?
Absolutely.
Now, do you have access to it right now?
Well, obviously, your dad and I probably have a difference of opinion, and you know that.
We have to have fossil fuels for our vehicles. We have to have them.
We're entering a new era of our planet, Dad, and of our civilization. This is a problem we've never faced before.
Today, Jordan's going to make the case on campus and hopefully win over some classmates. Since his parents still need a lot of convincing, he's invited them along.
Hello, my name is Jordan Vogel, and I'm here to talk to you guys about climate change. We've actually already seen impacts here in Texas, but there is a solution to this problem. A simple price on carbon.
Growing up in the agriculture industry, carbon pricing makes me very apprehensive. How are we going to make it if we keep adding more taxes to things that we're just trying to, feed the population?
If we don't act, the instability of droughts, of flooding, they're going to wreak havoc on agriculture as is. And so inaction is the biggest cost. We're talking about 3 to 6 feet of sea level rise in 100 years, displacing hundreds of millions of people. These are kind of the things that really start to get my gears turning and that start to frighten me.
It's unfair to tax carbon.
When I hear the word tax, I feel like someone's taking something away from me.
To me, it just seems like, what about the Chinas of the world that are, 4 times as large?
Vast majority of countries in the globe have agreed to reduce emissions by a certain amount. China and a lot of the provinces in China already have carbon fee.
You talked about earlier about how climate change influences us as Texans. Well, also as Texans, we're one of the leaders in the country in terms of oil and gas production.
Absolutely.
I could see, if companies were forced to marginalize their profits because they were paying a tax on carbon, maybe that would reduce jobs in Texas.
That's a fair question. What if he's right?
$6 billion of property damage, destroyed $2 billion worth of crops. The overall hit to the U.S. economy, $25 billion.
There's now evidence that damage from floods, fires, and droughts brought on by carbon pollution will cost the U.S. economy billions of dollars every year. And yet there's still no real prospect for a national carbon price in the United States. Opponents say a tax on carbon would lead to lost jobs and a weaker economy, but is that really true? Then I learned that just north of us, British Columbia, Canada, has had a carbon price since 2008. I have to go there, and I've asked Jordan to come along so we can find out if a carbon price really is a drag on the economy. Our first meeting is with Mayor Gregor Robertson. Are you nervous?
I'm actually really excited to meet the mayor. It's pretty crazy. They've had a carbon fee for 8 years already.
We've just done latest measurements of our carbon pollution, and we're down 15% since 2007, which has gotten us to that status of the lowest carbon emissions per capita of any city in North America now.
And if you were to hear that people in the U.S. were concerned that it would negatively impact the economy, what would your response to that be?
It's a myth. Our economy is thriving. We've seen big growth in green jobs. We're seeing clean tech industry booming, and I think that's directly connected to carbon pricing.
And we're here and the city's not on fire. We have a functioning city, so that's great to be able to see in person. And something that's really shocked me is just the unawareness of people within the states of a carbon fee, and that 8 years has passed that you guys have had this. How did you get across to the citizens that this was something that was beneficial?
There was a little wobble at the beginning because it's a new tax and people think, well, I don't want to pay more tax. A little bit from industries that were affected, but pretty quickly people realized it wasn't going to have much of an impact on day-to-day life or business success. We have to wean ourselves off fossil fuels. In BC and Vancouver, we're a living example of a very successful economy that has carbon pricing, and we're reducing our environmental impact, and that story should be told far and wide.
Carbon pricing is thriving here, and greenhouse gas emissions are down. So if it can work here, then why not in the States? I need to get back to Los Angeles, but before Jordan heads home, I've arranged for him to meet with a conservative businessman. Ross Beatty is a mining magnate and a major investor in a hydropower plant. He's agreed to give Jordan a tour.
You're going to see some very, very big rivers here that we're taking a little bit of water from, making electricity from, and then returning that water to the original river.
Is there very little waste?
No waste at all. Zero.
That's awesome.
My assumption would be that most very successful businessmen like yourself would be opposed to a carbon tax.
Well, I have 5 kids, and I believe in a cleaner, more sustainable world. I'm completely convinced that carbon is causing negative effects to our atmosphere. It's causing negative effects to our ocean. And ultimately, the life of my kids is going to be worse unless we do something about it now.
In America, one of the things stopping us from actually creating this carbon tax is conservative pushback. And I'm from a very conservative place. I come from a very conservative family, and I understand their fears and anxieties at allowing the government to create an additional tax.
Carbon taxing is a conservative solution because it's a market-based solution. You're basically making polluters pay. As long as we don't price carbon correctly, we're giving every single emitter of carbon a subsidy. That's not any principle that a good conservative person should live with.
A lot of these renewable energies are suffering at the hand of cheap gasoline and cheap oil.
Right. The fossil fuel company isn't paying the true cost of that coal or gas or oil power. They're not paying the cost to society in the form of climate change, extreme weather events, higher insurance premiums, health problems from people, breathing in polluted air. So what a carbon price does is it increases the cost of that electricity generation. And now you can compare that to, say, solar or wind power, which is either going to be the same price or even cheaper than generating coal power.
One of the big things I've noticed in Texas is finally we're starting to take advantage of what we're given with the wind in the sun.
Well, it's what's there. It's Mother Nature, and it's clean, it's sustainable, Jordan. Sustainable. Think about that word. It means forever. I think that society is now understanding the costs of carbon pollution, and there's a consensus now among scientists, among politicians, all over the world. Carbon pricing is a way to fix the problem.
This year, the Canadian government announced a nationwide carbon pricing plan, which means what's happening in British Columbia will soon be implemented all over the country. And it's not just here, it's happening all around the world. The US media is even reporting on it.
Almost 40 countries and over 20 states, provinces, and cities are pricing carbon. So are all of these carbon tax economies suffering great hardships? In a word, no.
Back in Texas oil country, Jordan knows that progress might be slow, but his family is starting to listen.
We live in the land of the free, but the things we do here affect others. By doing nothing, you're just condemning people. And for me, that's a tough ethical battle. These individuals that have no control over this, they are just condemned to this fate. But I can do something to change that. I can try and at least advocate for what I believe is a solid solution.
We need to do something about it. So I think America has to lead this. If we don't take a role and say, yes, we're going to do that, then, it probably is not going to happen. So I guess I would say I'm on your side, and I'd be there to help you.
What's the famous saying that your mother and I have always said? To much is given, much is expected. And that's why we're really proud seeing you do what you do.
Thank you. And you guys have, allowed me to live such a great, fortunate life, and I want other people to have that, And so for me, this is something that really galvanizes me, as a human, as a Catholic, as an American, as all of these things. This is something that I feel I need to do. And so to have y'all's support, truly, it means a lot.
You'll have the family support. You sure will.
As one of America's governors has said, we're the first generation to feel the impact of climate change and the last generation that can do something about it.
I started this journey wondering if there was anything my generation could do to help solve climate change. Now I realize there is a big solution out there.
We have to make some important changes to the world.
Yoram Bauman has organized a meeting with some of the youth activists calling for a price on carbon.
We can stave off the worst impacts or it's game over, and there's nothing more personal to us than the question of, can we have kids? Can we have a world that looks anything like what our parents had?
We have the power to bring about change. That's what our country's founded on.
What do we do now? What do we do now?
It's all going to be a matter of how many people can we inspire? How many people can we bring on to really make a difference on this issue?
How do you make it fun? How do you make it cool? And especially talking to young people like you guys do.
You can either be completely depressed about the future that we're looking at, or you can be grateful for being alive right now and being able to be one of the few people in human history that can actually change the fate of our entire planet. That's unprecedented.
Since graduating from Texas Tech, Jordan has moved to Colorado to pursue law. Tom started a carbon pricing campaign on campus.
What do you know about carbon pricing?
I know that it should be taxed.
He even recruited his college president to come on board.
To me, that's the single most effective thing that we could do, is put a price on carbon.
I appreciate that.
Camila is devoting her life to environmental activism and has moved to DC to lobby for carbon pricing full-time.
Because we all matter. Because we are all the victims of climate change, and we are all empowered to be part of the solution.
I hold in my hand my future, shrouded
And there are other Jordans and Camilas and Toms out there.
Take it from me, an 11-year-old kid. Your voice can change the world.
They know it'll be hard, but there are victories that can be won on campuses, in cities and states that could create momentum. They say they'll stick with it as long as it takes to build a movement, just like the ones that ended wars and promoted justice and human rights, powered by young people demanding change. This is the movement we need now. With so much at stake, our future depends on it.